Welcome back to Nature Documentary for Sleep. If you enjoy these late-night expeditions, leave a comment and consider liking and subscribing. Tonight, you're walking into the Afar Rift Desert, where the map is simple and survival isn't. It's pre-dawn on the salt flats near Dallol, and you're the field assistant pushing a small science team toward a gas station before the heat arrives. Your first step looks confident until the dry ground crunches through into warm chemical mud that smells like bleach and eggs. So you reroute onto darker basalt ribs, stacking a few cairns, saving your ankles and losing precious minutes. When the sun clears the horizon, it's less a sunrise and more a furnace door. And your water plan becomes arithmetic. Every decision turns practical. Move in short intervals, rest in stolen shade, and keep the team upwind of low, heavy gases. And when the pickup vehicle doesn't move on the tracker, how do you manage heat load, hydration rate, and instrument deadlines without triggering heat illness or a navigation error? You check the tracker again, like steering will intimidate it into movement. The icon stays frozen on a dirt spur, far enough away to feel theoretical. The team lead wants optimism, so you give them procedure instead. You count heads, you check caps, you watch for that first lazy stumble. Because out here, heat illness arrives like a quiet email notification, not a dramatic collapse. A crunch behind you turns into a wet suction sound, and you turn fast. One of the graduate students has stepped off your basalt line, just half a meter. Their boot has punched through the salt skin into a seam of warm brine. They pull free with a slow, embarrassed effort, and the hole steams faintly. Congratulations! You have learned that the ground can be liquid while pretending to be solid. You make a decision point right now, and you make it aloud. Nobody steps off the black rock without asking, even if it costs time. The team agrees too quickly, which tells you they are already a little scared. You take the front again, and you widen the spacing between people, not for comfort, but because a single collapse should not become a group activity. The light strengthens, and the flats stop looking white. They start looking bruised, streaked with gray, and patched with yellow. That color is not sunrise romance. It is chemistry leaking through. You feel the rift's logic under your soles, even if you never say it. This is crust being pulled thin, like dough, until it tears. And when it tears, the earth sweats minerals, acids, and heat through the seams. The station you are walking toward is small, ugly, and expensive. A metal box bolted to basalt with sensors sniffing gases you cannot see. If you miss today, the memory fills, the batteries die, and the month of data evaporates. The convoy will not turn around for your feelings. It will come when it comes, on a schedule written in fuel and risk. So you watch your watch, and you treat time like another limited supply. The first escalation arrives with the air itself. The pre-dawn coolness stops dropping, then stops existing. It is like someone has turned off the night. Your skin does not feel warm. It feels uninsulated. Every exposed surface starts absorbing the day with no delay. You can hear the salt underfoot, a delicate crackle like thin ice, except it is not freezing. It is cooking. You angle toward a longer basalt rib, darker, rougher, safer. The team lead asks if the detour is necessary. You do not answer with poetry. You answer with the hole steaming behind you. You point at it and you keep walking. The basalt is your lifeline, but it is also a problem. It has been charging in the sun since yesterday, like a cheap battery. Even now, in early morning, it radiates stored heat upward. Your boots begin to soften in places you did not know could soften. You smell rubber faintly, and you pretend you do not. Another concrete development arrives when the wind finally shows up. You expect relief because you are human, and humans love lies. Instead, the breeze is hot and it tastes dry. It slides over your wet skin and steals moisture without cooling you. Your sweat becomes invisible, which feels efficient until you remember what sweat is for. You realize you are no longer cooling yourself. You are just leaking water into an oven. So you change the plan before anyone asks for permission. Move 5 minutes, stop 5 minutes. You choose any shadow you can steal, behind rock lumps, behind packs, behind legs. You ration water earlier than planned, which feels wrong, but prevents a worse wrong later. The graduate student looks at their bottle like it has betrayed them. You tell them the arithmetic, quietly, so it sounds like a bedtime story. If you drink everything now, you will still be thirsty later. If you drink nothing now, you will stop thinking. You need thinking more than you need comfort. The team lead checks the horizon with binoculars, hunting for the station mast. The air shimmers so hard that the world looks underwater. The mast is not visible, only a suggestion, and that suggestion keeps moving. You do not tell them that mirages can create fake roads. You let them keep the hope, and you keep the caution. Afar herders appear as small dots far off to the south. They move in a line that makes no sense to your map. They are not lost. They are reading the land in a language you do not speak. They are moving early, or late, or at night, because they respect the thermostat. You are moving now, because your instrument deadlines are louder than your instincts. That is the human reality check, and it lands without mercy. You crest a low swell of basalt, and you see the flats drop away. In the distance, pale and unreal, the salt seems to glow. But the glow is not purity, it is exposure. No plants, no shade, no texture to break the sun. You keep to the ribs and you keep building cairns. Each rock stack is a tiny promise to your future self. It says, you were here and you did not die here. Keep going. Then the next setback arrives, wearing a familiar disguise. The GPS unit chirps, and the track line on the screen shifts. Not by much, just enough to make the team lead frown. The waypoint they loaded last night was based on last month's path. Salt flats are not roads, and last month is a long time out here. A seep has spread, changing the crust, swallowing the old safe line. Your cairns are the new line, and they are younger than the sun. You decide to trust your eyes more than the screen. You follow basalt, not pixels. That choice costs you distance, but it buys you certainty. The team lead does not love it, but they follow you anyway, because you are the one who keeps pointing at danger before it bites. Another development arrives when the smell changes again. It is faint, and it rides low, like something hiding. Sulfur, but mixed with something sharp, like a cleaning product. You stop walking and you raise a hand. Everybody freezes mid-step, mid-breath. You look for the source without moving your feet. A shallow depression ahead is darker and it glistens in patches. It looks like damp ground, which in a normal desert would be a miracle. Here it is, a trap with a friendly face. You choose the upwind side and signal the team to circle wide. You do not want their lungs sampling whatever is pooling there. Heavy gases can sit in low spots, invisible, patient, and rude. You can survive a lot, but you cannot negotiate with chemistry. The detour adds minutes, and the minutes add heat. Your neck burns under the collar, and the skin there tightens. You can feel your body spending water just to exist. Now the basalt ridge narrows, and the terrain forces another choice. To the left is a wider salt pan, flatter, faster, and probably deadly. To the right is broken lava, slower, ankle-twisting, but solid. You take the broken lava. You would rather limp than sink. You tell everyone to shorten their stride and lift their feet higher. You watch their faces while they pretend this is fine. The student who stepped in brine earlier starts lagging again. Their breathing is louder than it should be given the speed. You ask them a simple question, their name and the day. They answer correctly, but with a pause that is too long. That pause is a warning, like the first crack in a dam. You give them your spare electrolyte packet and make them drink. It tastes like disappointment, but it helps keep their muscles honest. The team lead wants to push on because the station clock is ticking. You do a quick scan of the group and decide to hold the pace, because if you push now, you will pay later with interest. And the Afar is famous for its interest rates. The landscape ahead begins to change texture. The salt becomes lumpier, crusted like old foam. Small ridges rise, and between them, the surface dips into shallow troughs. Those troughs are where brine collects and where crust grows thin. You aim for higher ground, even when it curves away from the waypoint. The team lead sighs, a small sound, already dehydrated. You tell them the straight path is a fantasy invented by office chairs. Out here, straight lines are how people become cautionary tales. Another development hits when you stop for a rest interval. You crouch behind a basalt knob no taller than your knee. The shade it casts is laughably small, but your skin reacts like it is. Your mouth feels dry, not like thirst, but like texture. Your tongue drags slightly when you swallow. That is your internal dashboard lighting up. You check everyone again. Hands, faces, eyes. One person's lips are pale, another's hands are shaking when they open a snack. Calories matter, but chewing feels like work in this heat. You make them eat anyway. Slow, salted, boring. Your body needs fuel to sweat, and sweat is your only air conditioner. The breeze comes again, hotter this time, and you laugh once. It is a tired sound, almost affectionate. The desert has a sense of humor, it just does not share it with you. When you stand to move again, your knees protest, not pain exactly, more like sticky resistance. Salt dust has mixed with sweat on your skin, making a fine paste. Each step feels gritty, as if you are wearing sandpaper under your clothes. You look back, and your footprints already look softened around the edges. Wind is erasing you while you are still walking. The station should be closer now, but the horizon refuses to cooperate. You climb another low rise and scan again. This time, you see something metallic, a thin vertical line. It could be the mast, or it could be a mirage. Pretending, you decide to confirm with the GPS. Just once. The screen says you are trending correctly, but the distance is still cruel. You do the math in your head, and you do not like it. At this pace, with these rests, you will arrive late. Late means higher heat, more dehydration, less margin for errors. But pushing means heat illness, and heat illness means the mission ends here. You choose the slower schedule again. It is the least dramatic decision and the most important. As you approach, the basalt ribs begin to funnel you. The terrain shapes your route like a hand on your shoulder. This is not just a desert, it is a rift in progress. Magma has oozed up here in the past, then cooled into these black highways. Now, those highways dictate where your fragile mammal body can safely walk. You step over a crack that runs straight for meters. It is narrow, but it has depth, a dark throat in the rock. You imagine it widening over centuries, slowly, like a yawn. Africa is being pulled apart here, millimeter by millimeter, and you, for today, are being pulled apart by thirst. Another concrete development arrives in the form of gear failure. One of the handheld radios crackles, then dies into static. The team member holding it smacks it once, then twice. The heat has cooked the battery, or the salt has invaded the contacts. You tell them to stop hitting it, because anger will not fix physics. Now you have less communication and more dependence on staying together. You tighten the group, but not too tight, close enough to help, far enough to avoid shared mistakes. You take another short rest, and you notice the graduate students' hands. Their fingers tremble when they adjust a strap. Their speech is normal, but their focus is blunt, like a knife that will not cut. You ask them again, name, day, and what they ate. They answer, but they squint at you as if you are far away. This is early heat illness, the kind that whispers. You make a decision that will anger someone. You transfer some of their instrument weight to a stronger team member. It slows that person down, and it saves the weaker one from tipping over. The team lead hesitates, calculating schedule. You look at them until they nod, because the schedule is worthless if someone becomes a rescue problem. Now the metallic line ahead resolves into a real object. A mast, thin, with a small sensor head and a box at its base. It sits on a basalt pad like an insult. No shade, no shelter, just equipment exposed to a planet that hates equipment. You feel relief for exactly 3 seconds. Then you feel the heat climbing, because it is now late morning. The air around the station trembles, and the metal looks too bright. You can almost hear the batteries inside suffering. You tell everyone to keep moving. No celebrating. Celebration costs water, and you are not wealthy. As you close in, the ground changes color again. Yellows, greens, and oranges appear at the edges of the flats. It looks like spilled paint, like someone tried to decorate the desert. You know better, and you say it out loud for the team. Those colors mean active chemistry, and active chemistry means thin crust. Dallol's hydrothermal area is nearby, and it is not a museum. It is a working factory of acid, salt, and heat. You smell it before you see it, that bleach and eggs combination returning. The station is technically outside the brightest terraces, but not safely outside. A low bubble of wind shifts, and the smell thickens. You push the team slightly upwind instinctively. You do not want anyone breathing deeper than they have to. Now you are at the station. You drop packs in the smallest scrap of shade you can create, behind the instrument box. You feel the metal radiating heat as if it has been sunbathing for years. The team lead opens a toolkit, and the latches are hot enough to sting. They curse softly, which wastes saliva but feels necessary. You crouch and read the station display. Salt dust has filmed the screen, turning numbers into ghosts. You wipe it with a cloth, and the cloth comes away gritty. The sensors need cleaning, the memory needs downloading, and the battery voltage is low. The mission window is now, not later. And while they start the servicing routine, you look back the way you came. The path behind you already looks different, like the desert is editing your footprints out of the story. The salt glare has thickened, and the shimmer has learned new tricks. You see the basalt ribs you trusted, but you also see how thin they are. They are not roads, they are leftovers. They are the hardened spills from older violence, still warm in memory. The team lead calls your name, and you turn back to the work. The station is not a single task. It is a stack of tasks, and they all drink time. A data cable refuses to seat properly because salt has crawled into the port. You scrape it gently, because force is how you break expensive things. Congratulations, you are doing surgery on a metal box in an open-air oven. The screen flickers once, then steadies, and the numbers finally look like numbers. You watch the gas readings scroll, impatient and calm at the same time. CO2, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, the invisible cast of this place. In human language, it means the desert has breath, and it is not always friendly. A gust of wind shifts, and the smell sharpens for a moment. Not stronger exactly, just more precise, like someone has turned the focus ring. You look down at the ground beside the station pad. The salt there is not flat. It is blistered into little domes, tiny crust bubbles, as if the earth is trying to boil without making a scene. One of the students crouches near a vent stain, drawn in by the color. The stain is a sickly yellow, edged with green, like spoiled paint. You tap their shoulder and pull them back, without discussion. Your rule out here is simple. You do not stand on anything that looks decorative. The team lead is downloading data now, and the progress bar moves like a lazy animal. You hate progress bars because they pretend your anxiety is optional. The battery reading is low enough to make you swallow hard. Not because you care about the station's feelings, but because low battery means rushed choices. Rushed choices are how you leave tools behind and how people get hurt. You take inventory while they work, out loud, like a ritual. Spare fuses, spare seals, spare cable, extra memory card. Your voice is steady, because steady voices keep groups from spiraling. The student with early heat illness sits in the thin shade of the box. Their eyes are open, but their focus keeps sliding off you. You ask them for a simple count, how many water bottles they have left. They answer, then pause, then answer again with a different number. That pause is a second warning, louder than the first. So you do what you always do in bad places. You simplify the world. You take their bottle, you mark it with tape, and you hand it back. You tell them, this bottle is yours. You drink from it on your schedule. Then you tell another team member, you watch them drink, no arguments. Nobody loves being monitored, but nobody loves a medical evacuation either. The station download completes with a soft beep that feels like mercy. The team lead immediately starts the sensor cleaning routine. They remove a protective cap, and a puff of salt dust lifts like flour. It coats their fingers, and it sticks to sweat like glue. You hand them a brush, and they brush the intake gently. You watch the air intake like it might bite, because the air here is not just air, it is chemistry on the move. When the intake is clean, the readings settle, slightly lower, slightly steadier. It is like wiping fog from a window and realizing the room was worse than you thought. The team lead starts swapping a battery pack, and the latch fights them. The metal has expanded in the heat just enough to make everything stubborn. They pry carefully, and the latch gives with a snap that makes everyone flinch. Your body does not like sudden sounds out here. Sudden sounds mean crack, collapse, fracture, or mistake. The battery comes free, and you feel the heat radiating off it. It is warm like a living thing, like it has been sweating in its own casing. They slot the fresh pack in, and the voltage jumps into the safe range. A small victory, the kind that still costs you water. You take the moment to check the satellite tracker again. The pickup icon is still stalled, still far, still insulting. It has not moved enough to matter. Your radio, the one still alive, hisses with thin static when you try to call. You say the call sign, you say your position, you say your status. You get a broken reply, chopped and warped. A syllable, then a pause, then something that might be a number. You try again, and the reply vanishes into heat. The terrain does this, the ionosphere does this. The practical result is the same. You are on your own. The team lead looks at you, waiting for translation. You translate honestly, but gently. No reliable contact, no confirmation, no timing. You can see the disappointment settle on them like dust. The station is sealed back up, the housing tightened, the bolts checked. They sign the log on paper, because paper does not crash. Your pen drags because your fingers are dry and the air is thirsty. You glance at the sun, and it has climbed to a position that feels personal. The heat now has weight. It presses on your shoulders like a hand reminding you who owns the day. You give a short command, packs on, final water check, then move. Nobody argues, because the air itself is argument enough. You step away from the station, and you feel the irrational urge to look back again. The box sits there, silent and patient, as if it will wait forever. But you know what the desert does to waiting. Waiting is how you become part of the landscape. You move the group off the pad and onto the basalt line again. The basalt is rough underfoot, and it tears at soft soles. It is still the best option, which tells you everything you need to know. You call a halt after a few minutes, not for rest, but for recalculation. You take out the map, the printed one, already damp at the edges. It is not water damp. It is sweat damp, which feels worse. You align it with the horizon, then with the GPS, then with your memory. The route you planned, assumed the vehicle would meet you near the station. That assumption is now dead. You feel its absence like a missing tooth. So you build a new plan in your head. Fast and grim. You cannot camp here because the station has no shelter. You cannot wait for the tracker because the tracker has no empathy. You need to walk to the nearest known track junction before night seals the heat in. That junction is not close, and close is a relative word out here. But it is a real place with a real chance of intersecting a vehicle. You tell the team lead your decision clearly, with no drama. We cache what we do not need, we travel light, and we go now. They hesitate because they are thinking about equipment and liability and expense. You let them think, then you show them the student's face. Heat illness does not care about budgets. The team lead exhales once and nods. Now, the decision becomes action. You pull out a dry bag and start sorting. Extra tripod, spare casing, non-essential sampling vials, anything that is weight without life. You choose a basalt outcrop that is distinctive, a jagged black tooth in the flats. You tuck the cache against it, then stack cairns around it. Higher than usual, you mark the GPS with a new waypoint name that feels like a joke. Not treasure, not supplies, just later. You take a photo with a phone that is already overheating. The screen dims, trying to protect itself the way your body should. You slap the phone into your pocket, and it feels like putting a hot stone against your thigh. Now you do the harder part, the irreversible part. The team lead shuts down the station housing to save power. They seal it like a tomb, tight and secure and indifferent. You watch them tighten the last bolt, and you understand, quietly, that this is the midpoint of the day, not on a clock, but in consequence. Because the moment you turn away, you accept you will not come back for comfort. There is no shade waiting for you behind that box. There is only more desert and the slow widening of a continent. You shoulder your pack again, lighter and still too heavy. The student with heat illness sways when they stand. You put a hand on their elbow and they pretend they do not need it. You let them pretend as long as they keep moving. You set the pace again, strict and small. 5 minutes moving, 5 minutes resting, but now the rests are shorter, not because it is safer, but because time has become another predator. The afternoon light is hard, with no softness left in it. Even the distant haze looks sharp around the edges. The ground off Basalt shifts between salt crust and gravelly ash. The salt crust is the liar. The gravel is the honest ugliness. You pick honest ugliness every time. As you walk, the air ripples in layers. It feels like moving through invisible curtains. You can smell mineral dust, dry and chalky, mixed with the occasional sulfur sting. The desert is not one smell. It is a rotating menu. You drink on schedule, not on desire. Desire is how you empty your bottle too early. You watch the team do the same, with varying degrees of discipline. One student takes tiny sips like they are trying to cheat thirst. Another gulps too much, too fast, chasing a feeling that will not arrive. You correct them gently because you are not their parent, but you are their reality. Water has to last, and bodies have to keep sweating. If sweating stops, the story gets short. A new setback appears in the simplest form. The ground becomes smoother. Smoother means faster, and faster means temptation. The salt pan ahead is wide, pale, and almost flat. It looks like the perfect shortcut toward the junction. You stop the group before they step onto it. You crouch, and you tap the surface with your trekking pole. The pole strikes crust with a hollow sound, like tapping thin plywood. You tap again, harder, and the crust shivers. A hairline crack branches out, delicate and immediate. Warm dampness darkens the line, and the smell rises. Bleach and eggs. Again. You stand up and look at the team lead. You do not say, "I told you so." You just angle right, back onto broken lava, and they follow. The detour costs you another bite of time. You feel the day sliding away, not because the sun moves fast, but because you move slow. This is the Afar's trick. Distances are not measured in kilometers. They are measured in sweat. You cross a patch of ash that has drifted into a shallow basin. The ash is soft, and each step sinks slightly, stealing effort. It is like walking on flour if the flour was hot. You can feel the heat rising through it, a stored warmth released with every footfall. You imagine the ash falling here years ago from an eruption you were not alive to see. This is the rift's memory, scattered across the surface. Basalt flows, ash sheets, salt deposits, all layered like a messy archive. Forget the postcard. This is the tectonic truth. The ground is not old and stable. It is young and irritated. It is crust being stretched, faulted, and injected with magma. Normal faults, they call them, as if any of this is normal. In human language, it means the ground drops in steps, making hidden ledges. It means the map can be accurate and still kill you. The student with heat illness stumbles on one of those ledges. Not a fall, just a sudden drop that jars their knee. They hiss in pain, and you see their eyes flash with anger. Anger is energy, and energy is a resource too. You stop, check the knee, check the ankle, check the skin. No swelling yet, no deformity, just a sharp reminder. You tighten their bootlaces, and you adjust their pack straps. You tell them to shorten stride even more. You do not ask if they can do it. You build the world so they have no choice. Another gust comes, hotter than before. It feels like someone opened an oven door directly into your face. Your mouth dries instantly, and your lips sting. You pull your scarf higher, covering nose and mouth. Not for dust now, but to slow moisture loss. You can feel your breath humidifying the fabric, then being stolen again by the wind. Your body is a small wet machine, and the desert is trying to unmake it. You reach a low basalt mound that offers a shadow the size of a blanket. It is the best you will get. You call a longer rest because you see it in the group. Shoulders sagging, eyes dulling, movements becoming sloppy. Sloppy is the first stage of stupid, and stupid is fatal here. You get everyone into the shadow, packed close like tired animals. You hate how close it feels, but you like that they are not wandering. You hand out a few salty snacks, and you make them chew. The act of chewing is ridiculous in this heat. Your jaw feels heavy. Your saliva feels scarce. But salt and calories keep your blood volume up. Blood volume keeps your sweat working. Sweat keeps your organs inside your body's schedule. While they eat, You take out the tracker again. Still frozen? You try the radio again, using a different angle, lifting it higher, changing your stance. Static, then a broken voice, then nothing. You catch a phrase, something like vehicle, stuck, and a number that might be ours. Ours is not a plan. Ours is a threat. You relay what you think you heard, and you watch the team lead's face tighten. They ask if we should wait here until night. You look at the shadow, already shrinking as the sun slides. You look at the open flats, shimmering like liquid metal. Waiting here means cooking slowly. Walking means spending energy, but buying distance. You choose walking because distance is the only currency the desert respects. You stand and the group stands with you. You feel the heat slap you again the moment you leave the shadow. It is immediate, like stepping from shade into fire. Your skin tightens across your hands. Your forearms feel dusty even when they are wet. You set off again, aiming for the direction of the track junction. The junction is not visible, not even as mirage. It is an idea in your head, supported by coordinates and faith. You move along a basalt seam that runs like a dark vein through the salt. It is uneven, fractured into plates that tilt and overlap. Each plate edge is sharp enough to cut rubber. You watch your footing, because a twisted ankle out here becomes a slow death. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just slow. A few kilometers in, you see something that makes you stop. A line of small stones, stacked in threes, spaced evenly. Cairns, but not yours. Older, sun-bleached, wind-smoothed, a route line made by someone who knows this land better than your GPS ever will. You feel a small relief and a small suspicion. Relief because humans have passed here and survived. Suspicion because humans sometimes build lines toward bad places too. You follow them anyway because they align with your heading, and because a maintained cairn line often means firmer ground. As you follow, the landscape begins to tilt subtly downward. Not a slope you see, a slope you feel in your calves. The salt becomes smoother again, and the basalt narrows. You keep the group tight, and you probe ahead with your pole. The pole taps, then taps again, and the sound changes. Not hollow, but softer, like tapping thick crust over pudding. You halt, and you scan the area. The cairns continue straight across a pale patch. The pale patch looks dry, but so did everything else before it betrayed you. You walk to the edge and kneel. You scrape the surface with the pole tip. The crust flakes, thin as pottery. Under it, dampness glints. Not water, brine. It smells faintly metallic, like coins left in the sun. You back away slowly. You look at the cairn line again, and you realize the spacing widens here. The cairns are not telling you to walk between them. They are warning you. This section is not stable. Congratulations, you have just been taught by a dead person, or a very careful living one. You reroute around the pale patch, keeping to darker gravel on the edge. The detour is small, but it costs effort. Effort is heat, and heat is water. You feel your bottle lighten, and you hate how fast it happens. The student with heat illness begins to move mechanically now. Their eyes are fixed ahead, but they are not seeing much. You ask them to describe the rock in front of them. They say, black. That is not enough detail. You ask again, what shape? What texture? They blink, then shrug. Their brain is conserving energy by reducing the world to simple categories. That is what overheated brains do. You shift more weight off them again, distributing it across the group. The others grunt, but they comply. Nobody wants to carry more. Everyone wants to survive more. The sun drifts westward, but the heat does not politely follow. It lingers, trapped in rock and salt. The air feels thick, even though it is dry. Your clothing sticks and then dries and then sticks again. Salt crust forms along seams, under armpits, at waistbands. You are being turned into a preserved thing. Slowly, you begin to watch for one more danger, the one people forget in deserts. Not thirst, not sunburn, but decision fatigue. When every step requires thought, your brain starts bargaining. It whispers, just cut across this flat spot. It whispers, stop resting, push faster. It whispers, drink more, it will be fine. You treat those whispers like you treat the smell of sulfur. You notice them, you respect them, and you do not obey them. The terrain shifts again, and now you see low mounds ahead, black scoria cones, small volcanic heaps like spilled charcoal. They are not tall, but they are distinct, and distinct is navigation gold. You aim for the closest cone because it will give you a view, also because it will give you shade, even if small. When you reach it, you climb the loose slope carefully. The scoria rolls underfoot, crunching like cereal. It is light rock, full of bubbles, frozen foam from magma that frothed and cooled. You reach the top, and you look out. The salt flats spread in every direction like a blank page. Basalt ribs scribble across it, dark ink lines. In the far distance, you see something that might be a track, a faint brown line, too straight to be natural. But the heat shimmer makes it dance. You take out the binoculars and brace your elbows on your knees. The line resolves slightly, then blurs. You think you see tire marks, then you think you imagine them. This is what heat does. It turns certainty into a mirage. You mark the bearing anyway, because you need a direction to commit to. You climb down and lead the group toward that bearing. You tell them the truth. It might be the track, it might be nothing. But doing nothing guarantees nothing. As you move, you notice the wind has shifted again. It is still hot, but it now carries a different smell. Less bleach, more pure sulfur, like struck matches. That matchstick smell means fractures are near, even if you cannot see them yet. It means gas has a straight path from depth to your throat. It means the rift is venting, quietly, like a pressure cooker that refuses to whistle. You keep walking because your only alternative is standing still in the sun. Your boots scrape over basalt plates, and each scrape feels louder than it should. The ground here has a brittle, glassy confidence, but confidence is not the same as safety. You catch the first hint of warmth underfoot that is not from the sun. It is subtle, like stepping near a heater in a cold room. Only this room is already hot enough to cook your attention span. You slow without announcing it. You do not want the group to interpret your caution as panic. You want them to copy your pace, not your fear. The sulfur smell thickens in pockets, then thins again. That is the wind doing you a favor, then withdrawing the favor immediately. You angle toward higher, darker ground, because gases settle low when air goes still. The desert does not just have topography, it has invisible layers. Low spots collect brine, ash, and sometimes breath that is not yours. The student with heat illness is still moving, but their steps are sloppy now. Their feet land wide like a toddler learning gravity. You watch their shoulders, because shoulders tell the truth first. They sag for no reason, then jerk back up as they remember to perform strength. You call a stop at the next lava lump, and you do it like it is routine. Everybody drops packs with relief that looks like surrender. You put them in the shade of a rock that barely deserves the word shade. It is more like a dimming of the violence. You take out your water and make yourself drink, because leaders forget themselves. Your throat accepts the water like it has been waiting for hours. You count bottles again, not because you love numbers, but because numbers keep you alive. The math is getting ugly. Not catastrophic yet, just trending in the wrong direction with conviction. You look at the sky, and you try to decide what time feels like. The sun is still high enough to punish you, but the light is beginning to flatten, that late afternoon change that promises evening eventually. Eventually is not comforting. Eventually is what people say right before they run out of options. You stand and you pull out a lighter from your pocket. Not for fire, not for comfort, just for information. You flick it once and the flame rises, thin and obedient. You walk a few steps downwind into a shallow dip and you flick again. The flame shrinks, not from wind, but from the air itself. It leans as if something heavy is pushing on it. You feel a faint tightness in your chest, like you have been climbing. Congratulations, you have found air that does not want you. You step back upslope and you feel the tightness ease. You do not announce this to the whole group yet. You move to the team lead and speak close, so only they hear. There is a low pocket ahead with bad gas. We stay high, even if it costs distance. The team lead looks at you, then at the terrain, then back at you. They do not ask, what kind of gas? Because the answer does not change the plan. They just nod, and you see their jaw flex once. Now, you have two clocks running at once. Water and air. The rift is generous with neither. You start moving again, and you enforce spacing, more than before. 2 body lengths at least, sometimes 3. If someone drops, you do not want a pile. You take the front, because that is what you do when consequences are real. The terrain ahead breaks into a mess of low ridges and shallow basins. From above, it would look like cracked paint. On foot, it feels like walking across a broken dinner plate in the dark. You aim for the ridges, even when they zigzag like an indecisive snake. The ridges are basalt and welded ash. Rough, but honest. The basins are fine sediment and salt. Soft and suspicious. The sulfur smell pulses again, stronger, then fades. You begin to see why. A thin line in the rock, almost straight, runs ahead like a seam in fabric. It is a fracture, narrow enough to step over, deep enough to swallow a trekking pole. It is not dramatic, not cinematic. It is just the crust doing what crust does when it is being stretched. Normal faulting, they call it. Normal like a broken bone is normal in a boxing ring. The ground on one side has dropped. A small step down. You step along the higher side because higher means drier. and drier means less brine. The team follows, boots crunching on scoria fragments. The scoria crunch is comforting in a strange way. It means the ground is solid enough to make noise. Silence out here can mean thin crust over wet heat. You catch the first hint of warmth leaking from the fracture itself. Not steam, not visible vapor, just a breath of hotter air rising. You keep your face turned slightly away as you pass. You do not need a lungful of whatever is climbing out of the earth. The student with heat illness stares into the fracture as they walk by. Their head tilts, slow, like curiosity has replaced caution. You grab their pack strap and guide them forward without stopping. Curiosity is how you die in a geothermal field. You keep moving toward the bearing you took from the scoria cone. The supposed track is still not visible from here. The horizon is a mirage factory still working overtime, but the ridges are leading you in a consistent direction now. That consistency feels like a small gift. Then, the gift gets revoked. The ground ahead drops into a wider basin than the others. It is smooth, pale, and almost perfectly flat. It looks like easy walking. It looks like a shortcut. It also looks like a place where heavier gases could sit all night, waiting. The wind dies abruptly, as if someone closed a door. The air becomes still enough that you can hear your own breathing clearly. You do not like hearing your own breathing out here. It makes you aware of how optional oxygen can be. You stop at the rim of the basin. You crouch and toss a small pebble into the low spot. It lands with a soft, damp sound, not a crisp click. You flick the lighter again, holding it low, just above the basin edge. The flame struggles. Even though there is no wind, it pulls itself thin, like it is starving. You do not wait for a second confirmation. You wave the group back with a flat hand, firm and impatient. We do not go down there. One student starts to argue because the low spot is so temptingly flat. You cut them off with a simple sentence. Flat is not always breathable. That shuts them up. You scan for an alternative line. To the right, the basin is bordered by a jagged ridge of lava, broken into blocks. It will be slow, and it will scrape shins. It will also keep your heads above the worst of the invisible problem. You commit to the ridge. Your body complains immediately because the ridge requires real climbing. Hands occasionally touch rock. Feet search for purchase on loose fragments. Packs shift and pull at your shoulders. The student with heat illness groans once, a low, involuntary sound. You redistribute weight again because you are now managing a moving failure point. Someone else takes their extra water, and you hate that decision. It is necessary, and it still feels like theft. The ridge lifts you just high enough to feel a faint breeze return. It is still hot, but it is moving. Moving air is information. It means gases are less likely to pool around your ankles like liquid. You keep the group on the highest line you can sustain. To your left, the basin looks empty, peaceful, harmless. You watch it like you would watch a sleeping animal with teeth. The surface has a faint sheen, as if it is damp. In the dimming afternoon, it almost looks like a shallow lake. It is not a lake. It is a low place where brine seeped and dried, leaving a crust over mud, and where volcanic breath can settle when the air is lazy. You move past it, and you feel a tiny relief, like clearing a bad neighborhood. The relief lasts maybe 2 minutes because the ridge you are on begins to fracture more densely. Cracks intersect, branching like veins. Some are hairline splits. Some are wide enough to make you slow and step carefully. You start seeing little wisps of vapor, barely visible in the angled light. Not clouds, not steam columns, just thin sighs. A fumarole, small and unimpressed with your presence. You keep your distance because the crust around vents can be brittle. It is rock that has been baked, chemically altered, weakened. It looks solid right up until it collapses under a boot. The rift is teaching you a lesson in engineering. Heat makes materials expand. Salt creeps into threads and ports. Acid eats metal slowly. And tectonics creates cracks that never asked for your schedule. You crest another low rise, and the world ahead looks different. The surface is darker overall, less salt glare, more ash, more basalt rubble, more scoria. It feels like crossing from a blinding white room into a charcoal hallway. Your eyes relax for the first time in hours. That relaxation is dangerous. You remind yourself quietly that darkness here is not always coolness. Sometimes it is fresh lava, still holding heat like a grudge. Sometimes it is ash, soft enough to swallow energy. You keep your pace disciplined. Move, rest, sip, scan. Move, rest, sip, scan. You hear a new sound underfoot, a faint popping. At first you think it is rocks shifting. Then you realize it is salt plates, thin and tense, flexing as you step nearby. They pop like bubble wrap, but lower, wetter. The ground is singing again, softly. That is not poetry. That is crust under stress, breaking in tiny failures. You steer away from the popping zones because they are telling you the surface is thin. Thin means voids, and voids mean surprises. Your body is too tired for surprises. The student with heat illness starts muttering low and rhythmic. You move closer, just enough to hear. They are counting steps, not because they are disciplined, but because their brain needs a task to hold on to. Counting is a way to stay present when heat tries to pull you out of yourself. You let them count. It is not hurting anyone, and it might keep them moving. The light continues to soften, shadows lengthen, and the heat begins to leak away from the surface. Not fast, not generously, but enough that your skin stops feeling like it is being roasted. Your sweat becomes less frantic. You can feel your heart rate drop a few beats. Night is not here yet, but it is approaching like a treaty. You keep walking toward where you believe the track should be, and then, finally, you see something that is not a mirage. A faint pair of parallel lines pressed into ash and gravel. They curve gently, then straighten, then vanish behind a low mound. Tire marks, real ones. Old, but real. The group reacts like you have found water. A few shoulders lift. Someone whispers, "Thank God," as if God maintains roads. You do not celebrate yet. Tracks out here can be ghosts too. A vehicle can pass once, months ago, and leave evidence that tempts you into following it forever. You kneel and inspect the marks. The edges are softened by wind. Salt dust has drifted into the grooves, but the compression in the soil is still visible. Not ancient, not yesterday, somewhere in between, which is the worst category for certainty. You stand and look along the track. It runs roughly toward the junction you are aiming for. That is enough to use it as a guide. You step onto it, and the walking becomes smoother, if only slightly. The group tightens unconsciously, as if roads mean safety. You let them have that feeling for a moment. Then you correct it. A road here is not infrastructure. It is a rumor, and rumors do not rescue you when your water runs out. Still, you follow it because it reduces navigation errors. Now you can spend your attention on the terrain and the people. The air cools by small degrees as the sun approaches the horizon. Your mind starts to work again, less foggy, more sharp. This is the cruel rhythm of the Afar. It gives you mental clarity right when your body is most depleted. You begin to think about the night march you will have to do, because walking in full darkness is safer for heat and worse for hazards. You check headlamps, batteries, and backups while you still have light. You make everyone do the same, because a dead headlamp is a disaster you can prevent. The student with heat illness fumbles their battery pack. Their fingers are clumsy, like they are wearing gloves. You take over, swap their batteries, and hand it back without comment. No shame, only function. The track passes near another shallow depression. This one is smaller, and the crust looks more intact, but you smell sulfur again. Sharper, more concentrated. You do not like how it sits in the air, heavy and still. The wind has quieted again as the day cools. Cooling air means less mixing. Less mixing means gases can layer like invisible blankets. You keep the group to the highest edge of the track, where it rides on firmer ground. You watch for animal tracks, because animals avoid bad air better than you do. You see none. That absence is its own information. You keep your breathing shallow as you pass the depression. Then you exhale fully when you clear it, as if you were holding your breath underwater. The horizon finally begins to show, the sun touching the land. The glare softens into gold, then into a bruised orange. The salt in the distance glows faintly, like a memory of the day's violence. You do not call it beautiful, you call it a warning with good lighting. As the sun drops, the desert changes its personality. The ground begins to radiate less. The air feels thinner, cleaner, even when it is still. Your skin stops stinging with heat. Your muscles still ache, but they ache in a way you can tolerate. You call a longer rest before dark, not because you are comfortable, but because you need to prepare. Night travel is not just walking with lights. It is navigation, hazard detection, and fatigue management at the same time. You find a small basalt shelf beside the track, slightly raised. Raised means less brine, fewer gas pockets. You sit everyone down and you enforce eating again. They complain softly because appetite is gone. You make them chew anyway. You explain it in the simplest human terms. Food is sweat fuel. No food means your body stops cooling itself properly. They eat, slowly, reluctantly, like it is a chore assigned by the planet. You check the student with heat illness one more time. You ask them their name. They answer quickly. You ask the day. They hesitate, then answer correctly. You ask what the last thing they ate was. They answer, and this time they remember without a pause. Not recovered, but not slipping further. That is enough for now. The sun finally disappears, and the temperature drops with surprising speed. Not cold, just less hostile. Your skin prickles as sweat evaporates. You feel goosebumps on your forearms. Absurd in a place like this. Congratulations, you are experiencing comfort as a side effect of exhaustion. The first stars appear, sharp and indifferent. The moon rises pale, and it makes the salt pans glow like frozen water. That glow is deceptive. It makes the desert look soft. It is not soft. It is a field of edges and crusts and holes. You turn on your headlamp and aim it at the ground. The beam reveals texture you could not see in daylight. Tiny ridges, small cracks, subtle dips. At night, your eyes stop fighting glare and start noticing traps. You start walking again. The track is easier to follow now. A faint ribbon in the headlamp beams, but it also fades in places where wind has dusted it clean. You keep a compass bearing anyway because tracks can vanish without apology. The group falls into a quieter rhythm. Footsteps, breathing, occasional clink of gear. No one has energy for unnecessary talk. That silence is good for sleep and terrible for morale. So you speak occasionally, not to entertain, but to anchor. You name landmarks as you pass them. A low scoria mound, a pale salt ridge, a jagged basalt tooth. You are building a mental map that does not rely on electronics, because electronics die. The desert does not. After an hour of night walking, you hear the salt singing again, popping, flexing, a faint crackle under the surface. The moonlight makes the salt plates look like ice flows, and that is the mistake your brain wants to make. Ice means cold. Salt here means heat stored in brine, waiting under a crust. You steer the group toward darker ground whenever possible. Dark ground absorbs heat by day, yes, but it is also rock, which is predictable in its own harsh way. Salt is unpredictable. Salt lies. Your GPS chirps again, and you glance down. The track line drifts slightly off your planned route. Not much, but enough to tempt you into correcting. You ignore the temptation. You learned this earlier. A digital line is a suggestion. Terrain is a fact. You keep using the GPS as confirmation only. If it agrees with the land, good. If it disagrees with the land wins. You watch the sky for a moment, using stars to confirm direction. Orion sits low, and the bright points look like they were pinned there long before you existed. You use them like nails in a wall to keep your mind from drifting. Fatigue makes the world feel unreal. Stars make it feel structured again. Another concrete development arrives when the student with heat illness stumbles hard. Not a slip, not a small misstep, a real trip that drops them to one knee. Their pack thumps against their back, and the sound is too loud in the quiet. You freeze the group with a raised hand because noise is not the problem, cascade is. You step in close, keeping your headlamp beam low because bright light can turn dizziness into panic. You ask them to look at you, and their eyes take a second to arrive. You do not ask if they are okay, because that question is for comfort, not diagnosis. You ask their name again, and you listen for slur, for irritation, for delay. They answer, but the words come out thick, like they have to push them through a narrow pipe. Congratulations! The desert has started negotiating directly with their brain. You kneel, and you feel the ground through your knee, still warm, still holding daylight like a secret. You check the obvious injuries first, because a fall can be honest even when heat is not. No blood, no twisted ankle, no broken wrist, just a trembling leg and a shallow, fast breath. You bring their water bottle up, and you do not let them gulp. You give them measured sips with a pause between, because nausea is waiting right behind thirst. One of the other students shifts impatiently, wanting to keep moving. You shut that down with a look, because impatience is a luxury item out here. You pull an electrolyte packet from your pocket, tear it open with your teeth, and pour it in. You shake the bottle, and the powder swirls in the beam like silt in a river. You tell them to drink, and you tell them to swallow slowly, like it is medicine. Then you do the harder thing, the thing that costs time. You change the group configuration right now. In the dark, when everyone wants routine, you move the sick student directly behind you, close enough that you can hear their breathing. You assign the strongest walker to bring up the rear, 'cause drift happens when people get tired. You redistribute weight again, and you do not ask permission. A spare battery pack, a metal tool roll, and a sampling kit move to other shoulders. The group makes small sounds of protest, but nobody refuses. Refusal is a daytime emotion, and you have already spent the day. You stand, and you wait for the sick student to stand without swaying. They do, barely, and their headlamp beam wobbles like a drunk lighthouse. You tell them to turn it down and aim it at their feet. If they look too far ahead, their balance will follow their eyes and betray them. You start walking again slower, and you hate how slow it is. The track underfoot is still there, but it is faint, and wind has sanded it like old writing. The moonlight makes the salt pans to your left shine like polished bone. Your brain wants to step onto that bright flatness, because bright looks simple. But simple is how deserts lure you into doing something irreversible. You keep to the darker strip where ash and gravel hold tired ghosts. Now the night does what it always does out here. It offers relief with strings attached. The air is cooler, yes, but it is also heavier near the ground. Cooling air sinks, and anything mixed into it can sink too. Carbon dioxide, for example. That invisible blanket the rift sometimes exhales. In human language, it means some low spots are not just depressions, they are traps. You do not have a gas meter in your hand, not the good one. You have a lighter, a nose, and the weak honesty of your own lungs. So you keep to higher micro ridges even when the track tries to dip. The track is a rumor, and elevation is a rule. The landscape ahead becomes subtly rougher, like the surface is wrinkling. Your headlamp beam catches long cracks that cut across the track, then vanish into darkness. Some cracks are clean splits, sharp-edged, fresh-looking. Some are older, dusted with salt, softened by time and wind, but they all tell the same story. The crust is being pulled apart. Patiently, you think of tectonic plates like shopping carts colliding in slow motion. Only here, the shopping cart is the continent, and the parking lot is your life. The crack density increases, and the sulfur smell comes back in short pulses. Not a constant stink, more like walking past someone's bad cologne in bursts. That is the wind shifting around small vents and small fractures and shallow, warm places. You stop again, not for rest, but for listening. You angle your headlamp across the ground, and you watch how the light behaves. Flat crust, reflects evenly. Thin crust shows subtle dimples, little sagging areas, like a stretched drum skin. You see a few of those dimples ahead, clustered near a darker strip. You do not walk through them. You swing right onto a slightly higher ridge of broken basalt blocks. It is slower, but it feels solid in the way a bruise feels solid. It hurts, but it does not lie. The sixth student makes a small sound as they climb, half pain, half fatigue. You keep your pace steady and you speak to them in short commands. Step, breathe, sip, step. You are not being cruel. You are being simple. Simple is what overheated brains can still obey. The ridge crests, and for a moment, you can see farther. The track reappears below, curving around the edge of a shallow basin. The basin is pale, almost luminous in moonlight, and it looks empty. Your nose catches sulfur again, sharper, like a match struck and held too long. You do not need more evidence. You keep the high line even though it drifts away from the track. One of the students asks quietly, "Are we still heading to the junction?" You say yes, and you keep walking, because reassurance is sometimes just momentum. You check the GPS once, holding it close to shield it from the cool night air that can fog screens. The arrow says you are slightly off route. You ignore it because the arrow is not breathing this air. The land is. The land is always right and always indifferent. As midnight approaches, your body starts making strange bargains. Your feet hurt less because they are numb. Your hunger goes away because your stomach is tired of being disappointed. Your mind sharpens in little flashes, then dims again like a flickering bulb. You start to recognize fatigue as a predator, not a feeling. It waits for you to relax, then it makes you step wrong. So you build little rituals to stay awake. You count steps in sets of 50. You name rocks as you pass them. You force yourself to notice basalt block, scoria pebble, salt crust, ash patch. Naming keeps you present. Presence keeps you alive. Another concrete development arrives with sound, not the salt singing, but a faint hiss, like air escaping a tire. You stop and you kill your headlamp for 2 seconds. Darkness returns instantly, thick and complete, and the stars pop brighter. In that brief dark, you hear it again, a steady whispering hiss. You turn your head slowly, triangulating by sound. Then you turn the headlamp back on and sweep the beam low. At first, you see nothing. Then you see it, a thin crack, wider than the others, running along the base of a low mound. From a small opening in the crack, a faint, shimmering blur rises. Not smoke, not steam, just warmer air distorting the beam. A tiny fumarole, barely committed to being a fumarole, but it changes the rules because it means gases have pathways here. It means the fracture zone you smelled earlier is not ahead anymore. It is under you. You shift the group upwind automatically, and you feel for wind direction on your cheek. The night breeze is weak, but it exists, and it comes from the northeast. You angle your route to keep vents on your left, not your right. That way, any heavier gas drifting low has to cross away from you, not toward you. You explain none of this out loud, because it will sound like fear. Instead, you say, "Stay on the higher blocks, watch your footing, keep moving." They obey. And that obedience is the most valuable thing you have right now. You pass the vent and the sulfur smell fades again. But your breathing stays shallow for a while because your body remembers threats even when your mind moves on. The track appears again and you drop back onto it when it feels safe. The track here is cut into darker ash and the tire grooves hold shadow. Your headlamp makes the grooves look deeper than they are. You tell the group to step wide of the grooves because grooves can hide sharp rocks. Sharp rocks can cut a boot. A cut boot can become a cut foot. A cut foot can become a reason you do not leave this place. The sixth student is quieter now, which is not always good. You check on them without stopping. You ask for a count, 1 to 10. How dizzy are you? They say 5. Earlier they would have said 2 because pride is a common symptom. 5 is either honesty or decline. You decide to treat it as decline because optimism has no function here. You shorten the rest intervals again, but make them more frequent. 2-minute stop every 10 minutes. Not long enough for muscles to stiffen, long enough for heart rates to drop, and for sips of water to be paced. Your bottle is getting light. Everyone's bottle is getting light. The math is now less ugly, more threatening. You keep thinking about the junction, not as a point, but as a concept. A place where tracks cross, a place where vehicles have to slow, a place where you can be seen if anyone is looking, a place where you can wait if you can endure waiting. Around 1 in the morning, the track climbs a low rise. The rise is gentle, and it feels like relief because elevated ground feels safer. When you crest it, you see the land ahead change again. The surface becomes a mosaic of darker plates and pale seams, cracks everywhere, some filled with lighter salt. It looks like a shattered mirror, glued back together badly. This is the rift expressing itself in small geometry. Not mountains, not dramatic valleys, just endless minor breakage. This is how continents come apart, not with a movie explosion, but with tired cracking. You keep moving because staying here to admire the science will kill you. The sixth student trips again, smaller this time, catching themselves. You tighten your grip on their pack strap for a few steps, like leading a tired dog. They do not resist. That worries you more than resistance would. Around 2 in the morning, you see a shape against the stars. A cone, darker than the dark, with a slightly ragged silhouette. A scoria cone, taller than the earlier ones, and distinctive. Your memory pings because you have seen it on satellite imagery. The junction is supposed to be near a cone like that, a landmark for drivers. Your heart rate lifts, not from exertion, but from the idea of approaching an endpoint. You tell the group, quietly, that is our landmark. Nobody cheers. They are too tired to celebrate hypothetical rescue, but their pace increases by a fraction. Like hope can move legs even when calories cannot. The last kilometers are not cinematic. They are repetitive and mean. The track fades and returns. Salt crust plates sing under your feet in short pops. You smell sulfur, then nothing, then dust. Your headlamp catches occasional animal bones. Bleached and small, they are not dramatic skeletons, just leftovers of something that tried. You do not linger. You are already in the same category, just with better equipment. The cone grows larger, and the ground around it rises into a small apron of black gravel. That gravel is a gift because gravel is drainage. Drainage means fewer brine pockets. Fewer brine pockets means fewer gas basins. You climb onto the gravel apron and you feel the difference. Your boots grip better. The surface does not flex. The air smells cleaner, less chemical, more like plain coal dust. You call a longer stop here because you need to assess before the final push. You sit the group down in a shallow lee behind a basalt block. There is no real windbreak, but the block reduces the sense of exposure. You check everyone's water out loud, bottle by bottle. The numbers are low enough to make the conversation quiet. You tell them the next part is simple. We reach the junction before dawn. Then we stop moving when the heat returns. Nobody argues. They are past arguing. They are in the stage where instructions feel like comfort. You check the sick student again. You ask name and day. They answer correctly. You ask what the plan is. They say, get to the junction. Wait, that answer is enough. Not enthusiasm, but comprehension. Comprehension means they are still with you. You stand and you look up at the cone. The stars behind it are sharp and the silhouette looks ancient. But this cone is young, geologically speaking. It is a pile of magma froth that cooled fast, built in a place where the crust is thin. In a normal place, you would call it a little volcano. Here, it is a symptom. You start walking again, and the ground begins to slope down on the far side. Your GPS shows you closing in on the coordinates. The track becomes clearer, more compacted. That means vehicles do come here, at least sometimes. That also means you can be found, if anyone is actually trying. The sky in the east starts to lighten, barely. Not sunrise yet, just a dilution of black into deep blue. Pre-dawn in the Afar is not gentle. It is a warning that the furnace is about to restart. You push the pace slightly because you want to arrive before the heat has a vote. Another concrete development arrives in the form of a marker. A post, crooked, half buried in salt drift and sand. It is not tall, and it is not heroic. It is just a piece of wood with faded paint sticking out of the ground like a broken tooth. You walk up to it, and you feel a surge of relief that is immediately undercut because the base of the post is buried deeper than you expected. The drift around it has piled up, reshaping the junction area. The marker is still here, but the land around it has moved. Not tectonics, not in one night. Wind and salt. Slow, constant, patient. This is the reveal you are not asking for. A meeting point in the Afar is not a fixed thing. It is a suggestion that the desert edits over time. You scan the ground, headlamp still on in the early blue light. You look for the crossing tracks. You find one set, faint, curving in from the north. The other set, the one you expected from the west, is mostly erased. There are tire ghosts, barely visible under a thin glaze of blown salt. If a vehicle came here looking for a clear junction, they might not recognize it. If they are late, the light and heat will make it worse. You feel the edge of anger rise, because anger is what your body does when it is scared. You swallow it down, because anger wastes water. You tell the group, we are here, but we are not visible enough. We make ourselves obvious. You choose a basalt patch a short walk from the post, slightly higher than the surrounding flats. Higher ground means better airflow, less gas pooling, and less chance of brine under your feet. It also means a vehicle can see you from farther away. You pull out a reflective tarp from one of the packs. It is crinkled and dusty, but it still catches light. You spread it over the basalt like a signal flag, anchoring corners with rocks. In the dim dawn, it looks dull, but when the sun rises, it will flash like a mirror. You also stack cairns, bigger than before, in a line pointing toward your position. Not artful, not spiritual, just functional arrows for a driver with tired eyes. Someone asks about a flare. You nod, but you do not light it yet. Smoke and flame are for when the air is clear enough to carry the message. Right now, the air is still cold enough to hold smoke low. You want your signal to rise, not smother itself. You set a strict waiting routine immediately, because waiting is its own kind of danger. You assign shade construction as the first task, not because shade will be good, but because shade will be necessary. You use trekking poles and packs to rig the tarp into a low lean-to. It is not tall enough to stand under. It is just enough to sit in with your back against basalt and your face out of the sun. The group collapses into it, grateful in a way that looks like defeat. The sick student sits with their head forward, hands limp between knees. You watch their breathing. It is steadier now, slower. The night march has cooled them, but it has also drained them. Cooling is not healing. It is just a pause in damage. The sky brightens fast now. The east turns pale, then pink, then hardening gold. And with that light, the desert wakes up again. You feel it in the rock before you feel it in the air. Basalt starts to radiate stored heat upward, as if it has been waiting all night to speak. The salt flats to the east catch sunlight and throw it back at you. Your eyes narrow, and the glare begins again. You turn off your headlamp, and the sudden absence of that small light feels strange. Now you are back under the big light. You check the satellite tracker again. The pickup icon has moved. Not much, but enough to make your pulse lift. Then it stops again. You stare at it, waiting for it to change, like your attention could push it. It does not. You radio, and you get a faint reply, still chopped. A voice says something like, bogged, trying. Later. Later is not a time. Later is a mood. You relay that to the group with the honesty it deserves. Vehicle is delayed, still stuck, still coming when it can. Nobody speaks. Silence is what happens when people do not have extra words. You make the next decision quickly, because decisions are easier before the heat peaks. You tell them, we do not walk again in daylight unless we have to. We wait here, conserve water, and make signals. You establish stillness as a rule. Peak heat is coming, and movement will turn water into vapor too fast. It will also worsen heat illness in the weak student. So, you schedule micro-tasks only. Early in the morning, signal tarp secured, cairns built, flare ready, radio checks every 30 minutes. Then you go quiet. You teach them how to wait in a hostile place. Sit on something, not directly on salt crust. Keep skin covered, loose fabric, minimize sweat loss. Breathe through cloth if wind comes to keep moisture. Sip, do not drink. You sound like a boring instructor, because boring is protective. The sun climbs, and the junction becomes an exposed stage. The reflective tarp starts to flash as the angle changes. It throws light in hard pulses across the flats. You hope someone is out there to see it. You watch the horizon for dust plumes, the signature of a moving vehicle. At first, there is nothing. Then, far to the west, a faint smear appears. It could be wind lifting salt. It could be a mirage pretending to be dust. You do not announce it yet. Hope is a stimulant, and stimulants can make people move when they should stay still. The heat builds steadily. By late morning, the shade under your tarp feels like standing near a hot engine instead of inside an oven. The air is still, and the silence has that ringing quality of extreme dryness. The salt around you starts to soften in the sun, not visibly, but acoustically. When you shift your weight, you hear a faint crunch, like thin sugar crust breaking. You do not move much, because movement is evaporation with a body attached. You watch the weak student's hands, because hands show dehydration early. Their fingers keep flexing, slow and restless, as if they are trying to remember dexterity. You tell them to tuck their hands under fabric and stop performing work. They obey, and you count that as a victory, which is pathetic and necessary. The tarp shade sags as the air warms, and you tighten one corner without standing. Standing costs more than you think, because it turns your whole body into a radiator. You sip water on a timer, not because you like rules, but because rules outlast moods. The radio check comes, and you lift the handset carefully, like it might shatter. You call the convoy again, slow and clear, giving coordinates and a short status. Static answers first, then a voice, thin and distorted. You catch fragments, something about a tire and soft ground, and trying to dig out. Digging is not fast in this heat, especially when the ground eats shovels. You respond anyway, because silence is how people get forgotten. Your reply feels like talking into a hot towel, but you do it. Then you lower the radio and look out across the flats again. The smear on the horizon is still there, still ambiguous, still insulting. You keep not announcing it because anticipation makes people waste water. The next concrete development arrives with the junction marker itself. You notice the post is leaning more than it was an hour ago. Not because it is moving right now, but because you see the drift line shifting. Wind is picking up fine salt grains and dumping them in new places. The desert is literally reburying your meeting point while you wait at it. You crawl out of the shade, staying low, and you walk to the post. The sun hits your back like a hand trying to push you into the ground. You tap the base with your pole, and the pole sinks into powdery salt. The post is not set in soil. It is set in an argument. A vehicle could drive right past this and never know it missed you. So, you add another signal, because being right does not matter. Being seen does. You take two dark basalt chunks and place them in a wide V shape. You orient the V toward the likely approach direction, a crude arrow on pale ground. You step back, squinting, checking contrast from a driver's eye height. It looks obvious enough, which means it will probably still fail. You return to the tarp shade and collapse onto your pack. The group looks at you, waiting for your face to tell them the future. You give them the only honest thing you have, a routine and a posture. Stay still, stay covered, keep breathing through cloth. Sip on the schedule. The heat climbs into that zone where the air feels thick without humidity. You start feeling your own pulse in your fingertips. Your mouth tastes like mineral dust. even with your lips closed. Salt is everywhere, in your clothes, in the corners of your eyes, in your thoughts. You try to swallow and your throat feels narrow, like it is conserving space. Congratulations! You are learning what dehydration feels like before it gets dramatic. The weak student shifts again, and you see their head wobble slightly. They are not fainting, not yet, but they are drifting. You lean close and ask them to track your finger with their eyes. Their gaze follows, but it lags like a slow internet connection. You make another decision, and it is not one you want to explain. You move them into the deepest part of the shade, and you take the edge yourself. It does not make you noble, it makes you functional. They are the one most likely to stop sweating first. If they stop sweating, their internal temperature will spike without warning. You watch their skin for sheen, because dry skin in this heat is bad news. The next radio check comes, and this time you hear a different kind of message. The voice says, "We are moving, slowly, but moving." You want to believe it. You also remember that moving slowly can still mean hours. You respond with a short acknowledgement, and you ask for an estimated arrival. The answer is a burst of static, then something like afternoon maybe. Maybe is a word that belongs in weather forecasts, not rescue plans. But you take it because you have nothing else to hold. Now you need to survive the worst part of the day without doing anything heroic. So you enforce stillness harder. No wandering to look for better shade. No walking to the marker unless you are improving signals. No extra talking, because talking is exhaling water into the air for free. The group gets quiet in that heavy, resentful way that people get when they are doing the right thing. Your mind starts offering you solutions that sound productive and are actually stupid. Walk west to meet them. Climb the cone for visibility. Run a flare now. You let those thoughts pass like heat shimmer because you have been here before. The Afar punishes initiative at the wrong hour. A small gust arrives, and for a second, you think it is relief. Then it hits your face, and it is hotter than your skin. It feels like a hairdryer aimed at your eyes. It pushes salt dust under the tarp, and everyone coughs once. Instinctively, you pull your cloth higher and tell them to breathe slow through fabric. If you cough too much, you dry your throat further. If your throat dries, you drink more. If you drink more, you lose margin. Everything is connected, and everything has a price tag. The wind dies again, leaving the air heavier and still. Still air is when gases can behave badly, even at the junction. You look around the ground near your shade, scanning for depressions. You chose basalt for a reason, because basalt is raised, and raised ground drains. Salt flats collect, dust collects, and sometimes invisible volcanic breath collects too. You keep everyone on the rock and off the pale patches. At the peak of late morning, the light becomes brutal and flat. Shadows shrink to almost nothing, and your tarp shade feels symbolic. Your skin under clothing starts to prickle, like heat is trying to find a way in. You check your own sweat rate by touching the inside of your sleeve. It is damp, but not soaked. That is not comfort. That is a warning that your body is rationing. You increase your sip frequency slightly, but reduce volume each time. It is a small trick, a psychological hack to keep your mouth from panicking. The weak student's breathing becomes shallow and fast again. You put 2 fingers on their wrist, counting beats without a watch. It is elevated, and it stays elevated. You tell them to lie on their side, knees slightly bent, head supported by a rolled jacket. Lying down reduces their workload and helps blood return to the core. They resist at first because pride is stubborn. You do not negotiate. You say, "This is not a suggestion." They lie down, and you place their bottle within reach, taped and labeled. Now you wait again, and you do it in 10-minute blocks. 10 minutes, then eyes on the horizon. 10 minutes, then eyes on the student. 10 minutes, then radio. Time becomes something you cut into small pieces so it cannot scare you. Just before noon, the horizon smear becomes more defined. It sharpens into a low brown plume, steady, not gusting like wind-blown salt. This dust has momentum, which means something heavy is making it. You still do not announce it immediately. You confirm first, because false hope is worse than none. You watch for the plume to move laterally, to follow a track line. It does. It advances in tiny increments, visible only when you stare long enough. Now you make the call, because the group needs controlled activation. Vehicle west. You say it once, calm, as if you are calling out a cloud. Heads lift under the tarp like tired animals smelling water. Nobody cheers. They just wake up a little. Waking up is dangerous too, because it makes people want to stand. You hold them down with your voice. Not yet. We signal when it is closer and the air is clear enough. You watch the plume for another few minutes and you decide it is real. So you prepare the flare. You do not light it inside the shade because you like your eyebrows. You crawl out, keeping low, and you check wind direction. A faint breeze exists now, moving from you toward the approaching plume. That is good, because smoke will carry outward. You stand fast and efficient, and your body immediately complains. The blood in your legs feels thick, like it has been sitting too long. You walk to the basalt patch where the reflective tarp lies flat, still flashing. You choose the upwind edge, away from the group. Then you strike the flare. The ignition is abrupt. A hot crackle and a bright, angry flame. The smoke rises gray at first, then thickens, climbing into the still air. It drifts west, making a dark ribbon against pale salt. You hold it steady, arm extended, and you feel heat on your knuckles. You count slowly in your head, because flares burn fast, and you want it to last. The plume on the horizon hesitates, then shifts slightly, as if the driver noticed. That shift is tiny, but it is enough to change the air inside you. It is not relief, not yet, but it is confirmation. You let the flare burn down to the last safe length. Then you drop it onto bare rock. You stomp the remnants into gravel, because fire out here is rare and still dangerous. You return to the shade, and you make everyone drink a measured sip, not because they are celebrating, but because stress dries you out silently. Now the next concrete development arrives with sound, faint but distinct. A low engine growl carries over the flats, warped by heat shimmer. It is not loud enough to be close, but it is real enough to raise hairs. The vehicle comes into view as a dark shape, then a clearer shape, a pickup truck. Dust-coated, moving cautiously, not fast. You see it stop once, then move again. It is picking its way through ground that looks solid until it is not. So even now, you do not relax. A rescue vehicle can become a second stranded vehicle in one bad patch. You stand again and wave a cloth. Slow, deliberate motions. The driver responds with a brief horn blast, a sound that feels almost surreal. Human technology, human noise in a place that prefers quiet suffering. The truck approaches the junction marker and slows hard. You see the front wheels dip slightly into softer salt. The driver corrects, steering onto a darker strip, avoiding the pale patches. They know enough. Maybe they learned by failing earlier. The vehicle rolls closer, and you finally see faces through the windshield. They look tired, squinting, sunburned, in that specific way that says, "I argued with the desert and lost." The truck stops on Basalt because Basalt is the only trustworthy parking lot. A door opens, and the first thing you smell is hot diesel and dust. The driver steps out, boots crunching, and they scan you quickly, not counting heads for kindness, counting heads for responsibility. You walk toward them, keeping your stride short to avoid dizziness. Your legs feel weak in a way that makes you angry. You give a short report, one sentence per fact, one team member with heat illness. Low water across the group, station serviced, cache marked, coordinates logged. The driver nods, not smiling, because smiles are expensive too. They say they bogged in a salt seep, had to dig, lost hours. You look at their tires and see salt crust packed into treads. The desert tried to keep them too, and it almost succeeded. Now you have to do the loading, and loading is work in peak heat. So you make another decision and you enforce it immediately. Only 2 people move at once. Everyone else stays in shade and stillness. You load the sick student first because triage is not sentimental. They try to protest, saying they can walk. You put a hand on their shoulder and say, "Not today." You guide them to the passenger side because it is the most stable entry. They climb in slowly, and you watch their head as they sit. They slump, then correct posture, then slump again. You tell them to keep their head back and sip water, small amounts only. The driver offers a larger water jug from the cab. You take it, but you do not let the group drink freely. Free drinking feels kind until you remember you still have distance to cover. You portion it, measured capfuls, because you are still doing math. Next, you load essential gear. Not everything, just what keeps the mission from becoming a second disaster. The team lead confirms the station data is on 2 devices. You make them say it twice because tired brains lie. You retrieve the reflective tarp and fold it, hands moving stiffly. The flare remains are stamped out, leaving a black smear on rock. Proof you were here, proof you were visible, proof you had to beg to be seen. Now the driver asks the obvious question. Are we going back for the cache? You look at the sun, and you look at the weak student's face through the window. You make the only answer that works in this place. Not now. You mark it, you log it, you come back another day with more water and better timing. The team lead looks pained because equipment has dollar values in their world. You remind them, quietly, that bodies are not replaceable in the same way. They nod because they know it is true, and because arguing is over. The truck turns around carefully, tires crunching on gravel, avoiding soft crust. You climb into the bed with 2 others. Because the cab is full, the metal under you is hot, and you sit on your pack to avoid being branded. The engine revs, and the truck starts moving, slow at first. You feel the suspension sway as it finds firmer ground. As you roll away from the junction, you glance back at the crooked marker post. It is already half swallowed by drift, a sign trying to be erased. The desert does not like permanent symbols. It likes temporary trespassers, leaving light tracks and then vanishing. The truck follows the faint track line, and you watch the terrain change from pale salt to darker gravel. The driver keeps to basalt whenever it appears, like a sailor hopping between rocks. You understand why now in your bones. Basalt is the spine of this place. Salt is the skin, and the skin can tear. The movement of the truck creates wind, and that wind feels like relief. Then you remember it is not cool air, it is just moving hot air. But moving air does help sweat do its job, and your skin drinks that advantage. You look at your own hands and see white crust along knuckles and nails. Dried sweat, dried mineral, proof your body has been spending itself. The team lead sits rigidly, holding a tablet like it is fragile life. They keep checking the files, flipping between screens, confirming the data exists. You do not blame them. Out here, effort without proof feels like a hallucination. The weak student in the cab has their head tilted back. You see them through the rear window, eyes half closed, mouth slightly open. That open mouth is a dehydration leak, and you wish you could tape it shut gently. Instead, you tap the cab wall twice and signal the driver to remind them to sip. The driver nods once, eyes locked ahead, because the road is still a suggestion. A few minutes later, the truck slows abruptly. You brace, because sudden slowing can mean soft ground, or a washout, or a crack. The front wheels roll onto a pale patch that looks dry. The truck hesitates, suspension dipping, as if it is stepping onto a sponge. The driver stops before momentum commits them to a mistake. You watch them get out, walk forward, and probe with a metal rod. The rod sinks deeper than it should, and you see their shoulders tighten. A salt seep, a brine-soaked zone under a crust, hiding its wetness in the glare. If they drive into it, they will bog again, and you will all become stationary. So the driver backs up slowly, tires crunching, reversing on basalt like retreating from a fight. They angle around the pale patch, taking a wider line over darker gravel. The truck jolts over small ridges, and your spine complains. But you prefer jolts to sinking. This is the Afar's main lesson. Comfort is often a trap. As you detour, you pass a low area where the air looks different. It shimmers not from heat, but from a faint rising breath, like invisible steam. A small vent zone, scattered fumaroles, barely visible in daylight. You smell sulfur briefly, sharp and clean. Then it fades behind you. That smell follows fractures, because fractures are shortcuts from depth to surface. In a rift, the crust is thinner, more broken, and more willing to leak. You think of magma intrusions, dikes, thin sheets of molten rock, wedged into cracks. They do not always erupt. Sometimes they just force the crust apart quietly, like a wedge in wood. That process is happening beneath you whether you are watching or not. The Afar is a place where continents are trying to become separate continents. One day, if the planet stays patient, seawater might flood in and make a new ocean. Not because anyone wants it, but because gravity and tectonics will eventually agree. You are leaving now in a truck over a surface that pretends to be stable, but the deep truth is that stability here is temporary. The driver keeps choosing high ground because high ground is where the crust is thicker. Low ground is where the rift drops, where faults create basins, where brine collects. Fault scarps are subtle here, not towering cliffs, just steps that redirect water and wind. Those steps control everything. Where water pools, salt grows. Where salt grows, crust forms. Where crust forms over wet brine, vehicles sink and boots punch through. It is cause and effect with no sympathy built in. The truck gains speed on firmer gravel,